and is called the journey to the Last Supper. Jesus' time on earth was unfolding rapidly, but he had more to accomplish before his time drew nigh. He called on two of his disciples, Peter and John, as he had done in the past, but this time there was an urgency in his voice as he gave them their instruction. As Jesus told Peter and John to journey ahead into Jerusalem and locate a room that he and the other disciples may honor the Passover, they could both sense a difference in their master's tone, but they never questioned as they set off on their mission. Just as Jesus had instructed, Peter and John requested the use of a townsman's guest chamber for the observance of the Passover feast. And just as Jesus had said, the townsman freely gave of his chamber, which happened to be a large upper room, perfect to accommodate Jesus and the 12 disciples. As Peter and John made the necessary adjustments to the room, preparing for the feast, they were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, trying to rationalize and understand the changes that they were seeing in their Lord. Peter thought maybe the stress was finally catching up to Jesus. After all, he was constantly teaching, traveling, and dealing with the venomous Pharisees and Sadducees. John knew it was more. He was too close to Jesus, and he knew his friend was greatly troubled. But even John could never have guessed how the coming days would unfold. When evening came, Jesus, along with all 12 disciples, became comfortable in the upper room. It was Jesus' desire to enjoy their fellowship as well as to share with them his heart and mind. As Jesus looked over his 12, he began to reminisce on his time with them. Half of them had been fishermen. One had been a tax collector. But yet now, here they all were, sitting with Jesus Christ at his full attention. As the disciples began to boast which of them may be the greatest, Jesus stood. He laid his robe to the side, and he covered with a towel. Jesus poured a basin full of water and began teaching the disciples a lesson in humility. Jesus the Christ, the Son of God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, began to wash the soiled and dirty feet of the disciples. In the minds of almost every disciple was a very common thought: Master, I'm not worthy. Why have you taken this task? Jesus completed the task, knowing the true meaning of the cleansing of sins and servant leadership would be the lesson learned by his disciples. Jesus again adorned his robe and sat with his disciples. What transpired next brought the presence of darkness and sorrow into the upper room. Jesus made the startling proclamation that one of the 12 disciples would betray him. The disciples began to question themselves and each other. The wheels that Satan had set into motion were now wildly spinning. How could this be? Who could it be? When would it be? Their minds all flooded with questions. Peter petitioned John to ask Jesus who it could be, as the tension thickened between the disciples and they began to doubt each other. As John laid his head across the chest of Jesus, he asked, Master, who is it? Jesus replied, The one who will betray me, his hand is on this table. He dips his bread with me. The one who will betray me, I will give a piece of bread once I have dipped it. Jesus dipped a piece of bread into the broth, and he gave it to Judas Iscariot. As Judas took the bread from the hand of Jesus, he thought back to what seemed like only a few hours prior, when he had made a deal with the chief priests to expose the location of Jesus Christ. The Son of God had been betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Jesus so clearly made it known that it would be better for his betrayer had he never been born, as he looked at Judas and he said, What you have to do, Judas, do it quickly. As Judas ran out into the night, the other disciples still didn't fully understand all that was unfolding before their eyes. Jesus, still troubled at the coming of his betrayal, arrest, and conviction, once again began to engage with his remaining disciples. As all the disciples focused on Jesus, he began to bless bread and break it, telling them it was symbolic of his body. None of the disciples, as they ate of the bread, could have any way of knowing that this symbolized the badly beaten, bruised, and torn body that Jesus would soon suffer. Jesus then passed the cup of wine, telling the disciples to drink the symbol of his blood, the blood of the New Testament. As they drank, they had no idea that soon the precious blood of Jesus would flow. It would flow from his thorn-pierced brow, and it would flow from the wounds inflicted by a cruel Roman punishment. Jesus said, "Do all these things in remembrance of me." Oh, the disciples had many memories of Jesus. They had many memories to dwell on. Walking on water, calming a raging storm, bringing a friend back from the dead, turning water into wine, healing all manners of afflictions. But the greatest memory of Jesus was to come. The greatest sacrifice was to come. As the disciples fellowshiped in the upper room with Jesus, they had no way of knowing that they were one step closer to the cross, one step closer to the completion of God's merciful plan of salvation.